Hey everyone, this is Chris Tapp. I am the singer and guitar player for the band The Cold Stairs, and you're listening to Talking Blues podcast.
Where does the name Cold Stairs come from?
Um, my drummer and I were in a band previous to this one, and we had gotten some success and had done a showcase for a few record labels, and it went south, and we didn't get a record deal. And at that point, we stopped playing music. I had just had my daughter, and so I wasn't going to play anymore. And we got suckered into playing a couple gigs, and I didn't want to add a bass player at the time, so it was just my drummer and I because I thought if I added a bass player, it would, for all you know, it would be a full band. So I didn't want to commit to being in a band, so it was just him and I, and we played a gig, and I kind of overcompensated with amplifiers for not having the bass player. And when we got done, Brian asked me, he said, "What what did you think? What did?" And I said, "Well, we definitely got the cold stares, from the crowd." And it just kind of stuck. But I think that at the time there wasn't a lot of the White Stripes and the Black Keys were out, but there wasn't a lot of bands that were actually performing where you really had the bass. I had figured out a rig that I could play guitar and bass together, so it really sounded full, and I think we surprised a lot of people when we first came out. So that stuck. We had a stupid name, the Show Pony or Show Ponies or something like that. We came up with. We didn't even want to name the band, but not too long after that, we continued to have some success and just kind of stuck with it.
Well, I thought that first gig went really well for you, did it not?
Yeah, it did. I think we were the a lot of people that were there had heard our other band, and it was just so much different than the other band that we were playing in. So I think it kind of took everybody by surprise. There was a lot of mouths just kind of dropped open, and people just kind of staring at the stage. I think they were wondering maybe if we were running tracks or if we had, I had a guy actually say, "Do you have somebody behind the curtain that's also playing with you?"
Wow.
Um,
Um,
at the time, so
it's an interesting concept. I want to talk more about the two-piece band. But before
sure.
that, you started on the piano. Tell me about the beginning, your musical beginnings.
Yeah, I think my one of my first recollections in life in general was just being with my grandfather. My dad worked all the time, and my granddad took care of me a lot. And um, I was very, very young, and I just remember sitting on his sun porch watching TV and Jerry Lee Lewis. There was some special that had Jerry Lee Lewis and Jimmy Swaggart both,
Hmm.
and I guess they were cousins, and they were both playing piano. And my granddad loved music and loved piano, and I told him I was 4, I think, and I said I want to do that. And I came over to his house like a week later, and he said, "I want to show you something." He took me in the front room, and there was a piano in there,
Wow.
and he had bought a piano. So that was kind of my first recollection. But I don't think I had even seen somebody playing guitar at that point. I didn't know a lot about music. I just saw that on television, and it kind of, and I remember after seeing it, I couldn't get music out of my head. Like I just, it was constantly thinking it. And that's kind of my first memories of life, you know, is the smell of that piano in that room and my granddad. But I played piano from 4 until I was about 13, and then we had a band. I had a band in second or third grade. One of us played kazoo, and we watched we watched Fat Albert, and they had a band on that cartoon, and so we had a band. But at about 13, I noticed that my guitar player in the band was getting all the attention, and I was stuck behind the keyboard. So I talked my dad into let me get a guitar and pay it off. So I switched to guitar at about 13.
How good a keyboard player were you?
I was very good at the time.
And this
Yeah,
is
I was very good.
self-taught?
No, no, I took piano lessons from 4 to 13. So I took for many years. And when I learned to play guitar, I was self-taught. But I think that helped me a lot because um, my friends that learned to play guitar, they all had teachers and they taught them the proper way. But when I came from piano to guitar, I just would look at a song and go, okay, it's E minor to G to D, and then I would just find those notes on the guitar. So I played the chords very differently. Like my E minor didn't look like my friend's E minors, you know. And they would say, That's not the right. You're not playing that the right way." I said, "Well, it sounds the right way. It sounds correct. It's I knew it was. I was playing A minor. I would find an A, a C, and an E, and I would make it work. So that helped me a lot become a little bit more of a unique guitar player versus my friends that were playing at the time.
So, at what point do you decide you want to pursue music? I believe the band you were talking about was called Shelby.
Yes, yes.
Um, was this still from Madison? Was it Madisonville?
Madisonville, yeah. Yeah, I was living in Madisonville at the time we had that band. I don't, I never remember not thinking that I was going to pursue music even in grade school, in elementary school. I always thought that I would do music. My dad was very you know, fundamental as far as you need to get a degree and be able to do something else in case you can't make a living at doing this. And my dad owned automotive stores when I was growing up, and I think he thought maybe at some point I would take over the family business, and I just wasn't just didn't want to do that. But I did get a degree, and I was working on my master's in history whenever we got our first real record deal. So I had my bachelor's degree in history and then was working towards my master's. So I thought if I don't make enough money playing music, I'll be a history professor later. I loved history too, so. But I don't think there was ever a time, and I remember hearing somebody say early on, if it's really who you are, then there's not a second plan. My dad made me have a second plan, and I'm glad he did because it made me see the world differently and also learn to be more disciplined in the way that I approach music. Just by the way, I had to be disciplined to get through college. But I don't think I ever really thought that I would do anything different. I'd rather have less money and play music than a lot of money and not be able to play.
But at one point you decide sorry, this band looks like something could happen. How easy was
Yeah,
that from being in a small town? And I don't know if that plays into it, but
yeah, it absolutely does. So it was very, very heartbreaking in Shelby because we finally got to a point. So I had played in bands my entire life. I'm in my early 20s, mid 20s when we had Shelby, and at that point, when I was young, I thought once you got 25, you should do something else. I didn't think I didn't understand that the Stones would be playing in their 80s. At
I
that
don't think
age, I
they did
thought
either.
everybody, yeah, I thought everybody quit when they got 25. So that I was at a point where I really thought, well, if I don't make it by 25, then it's not going to happen. And I don't know that I understood what make it was, but so I was at about 25. We had won a Battle of the Bands contest for Hard Rock Cafe or something at the time. We played in Indianapolis, we played another city, and then we played Cleveland for the finals. And the finals, you also played for all these record companies. That was a showcase that we did. And I just knew, I just believed that we were going to get a record deal out of this. But at the time, I was working so hard to do what I thought the record companies would want. And at the time, that music was, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and a little bit more grunge. And Shelby was a little bit more in that vein. But my love and who I really was blues. It always has been. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of that out, and I had blues influences in Shelby, but it was much more me trying to do what I thought that they would want, and they just saw right through that. And the other thing is, we had a bass player at the time, and when we sat down after our performance, we had Island Records across the table from us. I think Capricorn and maybe Hollywood, which was owned by Disney at the time. And the uh, the one guy said, "Well, I really like what you guys are doing, but I'm a little confused of really kind of who you are. Like there's so many different influences. Like I hear some blues and I hear rock, and then the bass player at the time interrupted the guy and goes, "Oh no, we're Americana." And the guy goes, okay, well, I'm really confused now because I don't hear Americana at all." And I literally thought about killing the guy. I just couldn't believe he said that, but it shot us in the foot, and I left there that night, probably as close to being suicidal as I could be. I thought that I had spent my entire life to get to that point, and that was my one chance, and it was over.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, obviously, this was a dream, and you had come a long way to almost have it. And this is probably the only time or the first time you thought maybe music isn't in my future.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what did you do then?
Yeah, I thought that I would play, at at church or at a wedding, or I'd play in my house. Um, I came home and I didn't play anything for about 3 months. Um, and I didn't do anything at all. And Brian was the drummer, obviously, in Shelby, and he called me, and I was broke at the time. We were both broke, and he called me. He said, "Hey, we have a friend named Dan," and he said, "Dan's got this gig, and he needs an opening band." I'm like, "Well, I'm not playing music anymore. I'm done." And he goes, "Well, I know that, but it's $300 each." And at the time, that was about what my house payment was. It was that could almost cover the house payment. And I was like, "Oh man, how long would we have to play?" He said, 45 minutes. And I said, "Well, listen, if we do this, I'm not playing any covers, and we're not having a bass player. I don't want any, but because we were somewhat famous around the area, and I knew if we played that somebody would say, 'Oh, Shelby's getting back together,' or Chris said he wasn't playing anymore, and now he's doing this other band." And so he said, "Yeah, that's fine. Let's do it." And I said, "Well, I'll see if I can figure out a way to play the bass and the guitar together so it sounds decent." But what I did was, it was the first time in decades, or probably in a very, very long time, that I just completely wrote music that I wanted to hear, and that was truly who I was, and didn't care. I didn't care if anybody liked it. I didn't care if it fit into any genre. And I also wrote the material knowing we wouldn't have a bass player. So it was the riffs and the vocals, everything was written in a very specific kind of way. And in that first session, probably within an hour of me sitting down, I wrote 3 or 4 songs off our first record: Jesus Brother James, John, Cannonball, Red Letter Blues. I wrote those songs very quickly. And I remember when we got together to rehearse, Brian was like, "Okay, what do you got?" And the first song I showed him was Jesus Brother James. And he just looked at me funny after I showed it to him. He goes, "I thought we weren't going to do any covers." I said, "Well, it's not a cover. I wrote it." And he goes, where in the hell did that come from? Like, why haven't we been doing something like that?" I said, I don't know, man. I had that riff in my head for a long time, and it's just what came natural. So I had an inclination. I had a bit of a light bulb going, "Oh, well, maybe this." I think it's almost like being on a date. If you're dating someone and you think that they want you to wear a certain thing or smell a certain way or whatever, you're trying so hard to impress them that you forget to just be yourself. And at that point, that was the first time that I'd stopped worrying about trying to get a record deal and just became who I was.
Did writing come easy to you before then?
Yes, yeah, that's the blessing. I've had to work to be the guitar player that I am, and the piano player that I am, and I put in a lot of effort in that. And not that I haven't put a lot of effort in songwriting, but that was something that I was doing when I was 5 years old. I would listen to songs on the radio and in my head replace the lyrics and give them to some girl in the classroom. You know, I that was just a blessing. And I remember talking to somebody whenever I was young, and they said, "Listen, you got this gift for songwriting, and it's something that God gave you. So if I was you, I would make sure that you let everybody, you don't take too much credit on that. You don't want to lose the gift. So I don't ever say I don't ever take too much credit for that. I'm that was part of my DNA.
So you're pretty convinced that music is pursuing music full time is not in the cards anymore. You get this opportunity, all of a sudden you whip out four songs, and then you do a gig, which is pretty good. Um, how are you feeling about things after that gig?
Um, confused, um, questioning things, you know. And I thought after the gig, okay, well, maybe like that. I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed just being myself. So maybe I'll teach history, and I'll do this every so often, and this will be something that I enjoy, um, you know, and not take it seriously and not have any expectations. The problem is that there was someone at the gig that night that saw us play and that messaged us afterwards and said, "Hey, I saw you guys play, and first of all, it was phenomenal. Second of all, there's a contest in Nashville for the Hard Rock Cafe called Ambassadors of Rock, and you guys should get in it." And I immediately responded back and said, "No, not interested. We don't. This is not a band. You know, um, we don't have a bass player. We're not playing." And he messaged back and he goes, "Okay, well, you guys probably not going to win anyway because there's like 1,500 bands that are submitted for it. However, it's free food and it's $300 each."
It's that
And so
magic
here we
number
go.
again.
Yeah, here we go again. So I said, "Okay, we'll do the one show because we only had to play 15 minutes, you know, 20 minutes. We had enough material." So we went down and we played that, and the first Sunday we played, we won. And I was thinking, you know, this is a fluke and whatever. I had a good meal and we got a little bit of money. Then we came back and then we won three more times in a row. And by the time we had won the third uh, contest, you know, it had whittled down. They'd had so many of these things, and it was maybe 10 bands left. And we played the final, and I watched the other bands play, and I just thought these bands are phenomenal. Like this was Nashville, you know, it's Nashville, LA, New York. It's a lot of talent,
Right.
and you know, I was just thankful. In my mind, I thought, you know, this was really fun, but we're not going to win this. And at the end of the night, they called the names, uh, and they got down to the final two, and I thought, well, we're not in the top three or four. You know, we didn't make it. That's fine. And we ended up, they called us at number one, and we won the contest. And I think at that point I was like, okay, well, this is this is what I'm gonna do. You know, we're gonna have to figure this out because now I feel like I have the algorithm. I understand that you just have to be yourself, and I have to write songs that literally mean something to me, and I have to just go with the flow and allow the water to move around me instead of trying to swim upstream the whole time. As soon as I did that, then all these blessings and all these things started coming our way.
At that point, do you know who you are as a musician? Like you said, I got to
Yes.
do what I need to do for myself. But I mean, is that pretty set, or is it still something you're discovering?
No, that's the point where I figure out who I am and or understand better who I am and see myself better, my self-awareness of who I was and what were my strengths. You know, at that point I thought, you know what, I'm not ever going to be Joe Bonamassa or Yngwie Malmsteen, but I really love Son House, and I really love, you know, uh, Hendrix and these other artists, and I can be that level of guitar player. So I'm going to focus on being a better guitar player, but I'm also going to focus on uh, furthering the songwriting and creating. stuff that's in this vein. And I was very, very specific at that point of not trying anything out of the wheelhouse of what I just created. I didn't, people would say, so and so is a great organist. They were interested in joining your band. So and so is a great bass player. They want to join your band. We had all these things that kind of started happening for us, and I just it I didn't want to change anything at all. Maybe to a fault a little bit at that time because I have grown out of that some, but at the time I chased it for so long. I didn't want to screw around with the formula.
If I understand correctly, very quickly you learned about the evils of the music business. And maybe you knew that beforehand, but you're asked to make a recording. It dawns on you guys that you need to record
Yeah.
and something happens. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this was this was almost as traumatic as losing the record deals in Shelby. So we win the Hard Rock contest, and the first thing they say is, "Okay, you guys need a demo, or you need an EP, or you need something." Because when we won, we had some record companies and some other people that were kind of started sniffing around. We had Ray Kennedy and some different producers that were at the shows, and we had a little bit of a buzz. So I thought, well, we should go in and record something, and we're kind of excited about it at the time. I asked a mutual friend, I said, we don't know anybody in Nashville. I don't know what studio to go to. I don't know anything. Like, who do you recommend? And he said, well, I know this guy named Chris, and I'll leave his last name out of it. But he said, I know this guy named Chris, and he's an engineer at House of David, and he's great. He's done some good records, and he could work with you. And so I contact him, and he's like, yeah, dude, I've been hearing about your band. I'd be excited to work with you. And I said, okay, what kind of money is this going to cost us? We want to go in and do 10 songs or 11 songs, and um, we have the songs down, so I think we can do it in a day or two. And I think the fee was $100 an hour. Um, Pretty sure that was pretty close to what it was. It might have been a day rate of 750 for the studio and $300 for the engineer, whatever it was. We were very clear about how much money this is going to cost, and so we sold some stuff, saved up some money, and we went in the studio with this individual. We cut all the songs in 2 days, and he's mixing it. He's finishing doing some mixes on it, and he says, "Well, I'll have the mixes back for you in a couple weeks." So we're excited. In the meantime, we have some entertainment lawyers, Kent Marcus, who was the lawyer for Kings of Leon, and we had a couple other, John Strom. We had some guys that were heavy hitters that were reaching out saying, okay, you guys are going to get a record deal. We'd like to represent you and um, help you with this. And so we ended up going with Kent Marcus, and we're waiting for the tracks to get back. And then one day, uh, it's been like 3 weeks, and I messaged Chris again, and I said, "Hey, I got we have some interest here. I really need these tracks. I just want to know where you are." And he says, "Hey, I just sent you a certified letter. You should get it any time." And I kind of explain what's going on. I'm like, "What?" So I get this letter, and it says, "Hey, I have been in Los Angeles showcasing some of my engineering and mixing work for some record labels. And in the process of doing that, I have a couple record labels that are interested in signing you." And I'm reading the letter, and I'm stopping as I go along. I get to that point, and I'm like stopping, and I'm like, okay, thank you, God. Here we are again. It's like I'm gonna get a record deal. And it says, but I would like to be compensated for bringing the songs out here and for getting your record, uh, getting these record label things. And to be honest, uh, that's the kind of guy I am anyway. If this had never been discussed with him,
And you'd already paid him.
we pay. Yeah, I would. First of all, I already paid him, but not only that, but if we had gotten a record deal, I would have felt so obliged to give him a bonus. He would have been, it would have been very. I would have done everything I could to thank this guy. But what he said was, I want $30,000, or I want $30,000, and I want to make sure that I am signed on to be the producer of the album. And if I don't get that, then I'm not going to give you the album. And I'm like, I mean, I just about killed the guy. I literally thought about killing the guy. I said, listen, man, I've worked a long time to get to this point, and I'm okay with what trying to work out something that's fair. But first of all, we don't have anywhere near $30,000. Second of all, we bought something and we paid you for it up front, and you're supposed to deliver it. We didn't tell you to go to LA and shop this stuff for us. We didn't know you were going to LA and shopping this stuff. And this has to be reasonable. And our entertainment lawyer was like, dude, this is a complete shakedown. And not only that, but we don't necessarily want this guy producing your record because you guys are about to take off. We got some big producers that are talking about doing this. And the guy just said no. He said, I'm not going to give you the album until we get this signed that says that I'm getting $30,000 and I'm going to be the producer. And he lawyered up. So for the next 6 to 8 months, maybe even a little bit longer than that, I would have a weekly call with our lawyer, and he would update me that he was fighting with their lawyer, and it was a back and forth and trying to negotiate. And finally, towards the end of that, I got sick, and I found out that I had cancer at the time. And I called the guy and I said, "Listen, man, I don't know how much I don't know what's going to happen with this, but I can tell you that you owe us that record, and if I don't get it, this is not going to go well for you." I was at that point, and finally he just gave in, and we got the record. The funny thing is, so at that point, we finally found out who the record company. So he wouldn't tell us who the record companies were that were interested. So I couldn't even reach out to the record companies to say, "Are you talking with Chris about us?" We found out that one of the record labels was Hollywood Records, uh, and the other one was Capitol. And when we reached out, Matt Harris was the A&R at Hollywood, and when we reached out to him, I said, "Hey Matt, this is Chris Tapp with the Cold Stairs. I understand that you're interested in us." He goes, "Look, man, I was interested in you like 6 months ago. I was trying to figure out why you didn't respond. I just thought, like, usually when somebody says they're interested in a record deal, they'll at least say, 'What's the offer?' Like, you guys didn't even respond." And I said, "Well, we didn't respond because we didn't have any idea, that who it was." Um, and but that point, the world was upside down because they said, "Hey, we're definitely interested in signing you as an artist, but we have an expectation that you're going to be able to tour and promote the record." And at that point, my doctor, I'd entered about 18 months of chemo and radiation off and on, and I couldn't do anything, so I had to give up the record deals. We had to kind of pass on the opportunity at that point.
Okay, so this was a serious illness, cancer, and your life was on the line. How are you feeling about things? What does the world look like to you at that point?
Um, Very curious, very um, just not understanding why the path is the path for me versus the path that other people have. And um, but at that point, I also had my daughter, and I was very specific minded to spending as much time with her, and trying to get healthy and figure out a way to get past it. So when I made the announcement that we were going to have to cancel some shows and that I was sick, I had a friend of ours that was a fan that was coming out to see us in Nashville, and I had been diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma. I had tumors in my lymph nodes underneath my arm from melanoma that had traveled from my back that my doctor had told me was okay and misdiagnosed. And she reached out and she said, "Hey, I work for one of the best melanoma doctors in the United States. You should try to come to Vanderbilt and see Jeff Sossman." And uh, and I said, "Well, curious enough, my doctor reached out to them and tried to get me in and said it's going to be 6 weeks, and they're saying I don't have 6 weeks to start treatment. I have to start treatment now, or this is going to get bad." And she said, "Well, send me your phone number." And she calls me about 10 minutes later, and she goes, uh, "What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything." She goes, "I have you an appointment at 9 o'clock." And so um, I got in with him, and the original plan was interferon and some stuff that I was going to do in Louisville. When I went to Vanderbilt, they put me in a trial for a drug called Yervoy that was approved for stage 4, but not for stage 3, and they were just kind of figuring out what it did. And I was able to get in the trial, and the drug, and the doctor really saved my life. I really honestly believe that hadn't I gone to Nashville and done that, that I don't think I would be here today because it was really bad at the time. Um, but some things like that started happening, and I thought, again, stop trying to swim against the water. See your place in the water and let it just just try to understand that there's going to be some purpose and some path. So I knew for sure that that didn't happen out of just random circumstance. That her being there, and then I start looking back and going, okay, if I hadn't gotten this band and I had gotten sick, I wouldn't have known this lady. If I hadn't played Nashville, I wouldn't have known this lady. If I hadn't won the Hard Rock Cafe, if I had quit it, if there's if any of the dice move earlier in the game, then I'm not where I'm at now getting healed at Vanderbilt by this doctor. And so I just started looking at life differently and thinking, everything along the way, even though it feels like something that is a hindrance or something bad that's happening in your life, if you don't look at it that way, if you look at it as it's something that changes the path and just trust that eventually it's going to work out, then I just, my mind shift changed. So when I started having that mindset, then I thought, I'm going to get better. And I don't know if I've got a full life ahead of me or if I've got 10 years ahead of me because I also had a friend named Billy Block that was he had a big show in Nashville, and he had melanoma, and it wasn't too long after that I got diagnosed that he died. And I knew how serious it was, and my doctor told me, but I was determined in my mind. I said, okay, I'm going to get a record deal, get back at this. I'm going to get a record deal, and I'm going to see my daughter drive. I'm not leaving this world until I accomplish those two things. And my daughter was a couple years old at that point. Um, and I just got really diligent about positive thinking, and my work ethic changed and my focus changed. And we went back in the studio. I was going through chemo, and the chemo, the year boy that I was on, caused you to break out in a rash kind of from head to toe. So I had fever and I was in a rash, and we were in the studio starting to record the songs that would be on the record Mountain. And I sent some songs out to a friend of mine, and he goes, "I know this guy named Mark Needham in California. We should send him some songs and see if he likes it." And Jesus Brother James and some of the songs, the album was just getting ready to come out that we finally got back from Chris, and I had those tracks to send him, and he sent message back and said, "I love it. Let me help you get a record deal." So he flew us out to LA, and we started working on the rest of kind of what led to where we are now.
But did you not release the first few albums on your own?
We released the first we released the first record on our own after uh, the Howlin' Wind record. We That's when we started working with Mark, and that's when the record label started coming back around again. And it was at that point that Mark really invested in the band, and we didn't understand really what was going on at the time. But he said, "Okay, what we're going to do is a production deal. I'm going to bring you out here and we're going to record some more songs and I'm going to help you get a record deal." Well, Mark paid for all the studio time. He paid for our flights. He fronted all this money, probably 40 to $50,000, in this part of this production deal. But what happened was the record companies came to the table, and when they did, uh, the deals were so bad. Um, they were 360 deals, and basically, uh, Mark would kind of recoup some of his money, but we wouldn't see any money at all. If we went on tour, we wouldn't even keep merch money. It just wasn't our, and our lawyer at the time uh, was like, if you guys want to do this so that you can say you got a record deal, then do it. But these aren't good deals. And I told Mark, I said, man, I just don't think I can do this. It just doesn't make sense for us to do this. And he was like, don't do it. I love you guys. You're gonna make it one way or the other. If you don't want to sign, then don't sign. So we turned down, I think, two record deals and stopped discussion on a third. Um, and then we put out, put out the record ourselves. Put out Mountain, which was the next one ourselves.
Which is a
Um,
great album, by the way.
yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. I wrote that thinking, not knowing how long I'd be around. So at the time, that was absolutely the best I could do.
And a little different from everything else, I think, up to that
Yeah,
point,
yeah,
and a little more acoustic.
yes, yeah,
A few things come to mind. So you go through this thing with that original producer, and you see not the worst of human beings, but you see a bad side.
yeah,
So, something that's not very impressive. Then you see one of these fans come through for you, practically saves your life, which is showing you the good side of people. And
yeah.
then Mark comes along and invests in you and believes in you. At that point, I wonder, how much do you have trust in people after going through what you went through with the original producer?
I th- I I don't know that I thought a whole lot about it as far as the human aspect of what to expect out of people, good and bad. But I did have after we got burnt on the record, I had a very bad taste in my mouth for just the record deal, just the record industry, and just how there's a lot of sharks in the water. And I was looking at the record deals and just knew that they weren't good for us. And I told Brian at the time, I said, we can sign one of these record deals, and what's going to happen is we're going to go out on the road, and if we're not successful pretty quickly, we're not going to have enough money to pay our rent and pay the bills. I've got a daughter at home now. I've got to make this. The other make it make sense. So the other thing is that if we don't sign a record deal and we do it ourselves, we're going to keep all the money, and we can gamble and bet on ourselves, and we might not be rich, but we're going to make enough, you know, to cover ourselves. So my distrust probably from the incident that happened might have helped keep me from signing the record uh, deal later. But the thing that happened with the lady in Nashville helping me get in there also gave me a lot of trust that I'm supposed to be here and I'm supposed to stick around and I really have a purpose. And I was adamant at that time to work as hard and do as much music as I possibly could, and get out as much as I could while I was here. So I think I kind of looked at everything a little bit different. And right after when Mountain came out, we got the sync with Sleeping with Lions, and that song ended up on Animal Kingdom on TNT. And then it also bounced into a Monster Energy commercial and two or three other things, and all of a sudden we were back where we had a lot of interest from record labels again. And then the next record, we ended up from there forward, up until recently, we had record deals through there. Uh, but we chose record companies that really made sense and the deals really made sense. So it sucked that I had that experience early on with the Howlin' Wind record and Chris holding that record, but it did make me wise to making sure that we did good deals after that.
I get the impression you're a very religious person. Did that help you through, or did that make you religious? Like that faith you have, was that there throughout all of this?
I had been I had faith from uh, being around my granddad whenever I was young, and just he was a very godly man, and um, I had that influence all the way leading up to that point. But my self understanding of what God is to me, and kind of what God is in this life to me, radically changed around that time, and just kind of seeing things not not in so that uh, I had a fundamental change of how I thought of God, but more of the purpose. Like we've all got a purpose, and there's everybody has a thing that they're supposed to be doing here, and it may look small to other people, it may look big, but everybody has a thing they're supposed to do. And once I kind of thought that, I thought, well, I'm hanging around here. There's a reason I'm hanging around here, so whatever the purpose is. So I did at that point decide there's going to be a certain part of our music that has religious overtones because it's who I am. It's the, not because I thought, we'd have fans that would say, I'm so it's kind of interesting that you had this song on there or that song, or they would say, it's kind of interesting to me that I heard you in an interview and you said shit, or I saw you have a beer at the show, but you had this song on that was religious. And so, but I I understood after the shift that took place early on that I have to be honest. I have to be who I am, and that not only will people respect me more, but they will respect the music more if I'm being honest, and I'm somewhat of a Johnny Cash. I like songs about killing people, and I like songs about God. It's just part of my upbringing, and what I've been influenced by, and so it's easier for me to just be honest about it.
I just find having gone through something like that, which is pretty crazy. It must have been scary at times. Um, you're basically facing death, and to come through that, it's got to change you.
Yeah, it makes you not take time or experiences for granted. It makes you look at things a little bit differently. I woke up whenever I first found out that I had cancer, and the doctor told me that I might not have very long. For a couple weeks after that, I woke up every morning and just sobbed. Just woke up and cried. And every morning I would wake up and wonder, was it a dream? Like, I feel okay. Is it, is leading up into the time that I had the surgery where they took the lymph nodes and stuff out, I would have to, I was just in a weird place. I just woke up and I would think, why me? Like, all I've wanted is this one thing, and I've worked so hard for this one thing, and now I'm not even going to be here to try to, like, should I have worked harder? Should I have, what should I have done different? Um, but that radically changed very quickly when, after I had the surgery, they started me on the chemo and radiation really quickly. And I would go in for chemo, and I would meet some 7 year old kid waiting in there to take chemo and tell me what he had going on, and then a couple weeks later he wouldn't be there, and I knew he died, and I started thinking then, here I am at like 28 years old or 30, however old I was, and I'm upset about this, that I might not make it, but yet this kid never even saw his 10th birthday. He never knew what it was like to drive a car. He never got to go to Disneyland. He might not have seen a beach. Who all these experiences and these things that I've been able to share in this life already. And then I just stopped saying why me at all. And I started thinking, I am so blessed. Like I am, no, I didn't get a record deal, but look what I've accomplished. And my mindset just shifted. And um, yes, it is much different than what it was before that. But I had some other things. My granddad committed suicide, and I obviously was really close with him. And um, there are things I think in everybody's life along the path that happen. There's a grenades on the side of the road for everybody that walks
Mhm.
the path of life, and each one of those things changes you. And this was another thing that changed me.
So you decide to release the first few albums on your own. How much you know about releasing an album and the business of music?
After we got burnt, I just really asked questions, studied everything. While we were working with Mark, paid attention to everything that was going on, asked questions about through the lawyers, tried to understand, got a better understanding of how record deals work, how everything was working, streaming was just getting introduced, how that might shift things. Just really studied. And the other thing that we did was I looked at the costs that Mark incurred making those uh, recordings with us and working with us. And I thought if I could learn how to do some of this, then I could offset some of that cost. So when we were mixing, I watched everything that he did. When we were placing microphones, I watched everything that he did, and I asked questions, and we studied that as much as we could. And just in general, just tried to soak up. And one thing I would say, and I say this all the time, I have bands that message me and say, "Hey, man, you know, I see that you got a couple 100,000 people following you, or you played this festival, or you were on a TV show or video game. Like what do I need to do with my music to be able to do that?" And my response a lot of times is learn how to make your artwork, learn how to do your press releases, learn how to become your own booking agent, learn how to make sure you're writing your own songs, learn how to do all these other things that are not glamorous or fun, but you have to pay somebody else or trust somebody else to do. If you can learn how to do all that yourself, then your reliance on a record company or somebody else is negligible, you know. So that's what we tried to do.
Okay, but by the second album, if I'm not mistaken, Head Bent, you had actually gotten a song onto a commercial,
Yes.
a Dodge commercial. How did that happen, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, yeah. Scott, the guy that owns Small Stone Records. So when we got into that record deal, uh, he approached us and said, "Hey, man, I really like your music. I have a small record company. We're very simple the way we operate things, and I'll give you this amount of money to record, and everything that you make on the record, we split 50-50." And it just made the deal just made sense. He also worked with ad executives. He worked for a creative company that worked with some different companies, and he told us that he said, I may have an opportunity to pitch you for Dodge or Chevy or Ford. We work with car companies, and I'll do that to the best of my ability. And just a really honest, straightforward guy. And the other bands on that label were heavier than us. And I told him, I said, we don't really, I don't know that we really fit that. and he said, well, you guys do in the fact that you're kind of self-sustaining and you kind of do, you're not relying on anybody else, and I like that too. And so that helped, and so that deal really made sense and was structured at that time that we did the record deal with Scott. We also had a record deal offer from Mascot Records, who we signed with later, but we also had a couple other labels that we were talking to, and that deal was not only simple but fair, and I had already done enough homework to know, you know, to make sure we didn't do a bad deal. So we did that as a one album deal, and it got us up another flight of steps for the next deal that followed that one.
So what did that exposure with the Dodge commercial do for you? Was it big or was it not?
Yeah, each one of those, every time that we've got one of those licensing deals has helped. Um, it depends on kind of where you are in your career and what's happening around you. If you're already if you've already got a little momentum, and then one of those things happens, and it really can help. Uh, and at the time, we did have a little momentum. We started playing more. Our hurdle at that point was I was still booking all our shows, but what it did was it made our streaming numbers go up. Streaming numbers made the possibility to play more festivals come up, starting to get on more people's radars. And it also, that deal paid back the what we owed on the record almost immediately, and we were in the black. So a light bulb went off in my head of, hey, we can make X amount of dollars playing on the road and selling records, but we can make a lot of money if we can get some more of these commercials or TV things, or um, spots like that. So
But that's not an easy thing to do, and you guys have had that opportunity numerous times
yeah,
and
uh,
continue to have it.
yeah, it's because once we got that first one, I believed that we would get more, and I still believe that we have more coming. I uh, I already I already am thankful for the ones that are coming that are not here yet. I just
Right.
there's my mindset was like, this is a great thing. We need more of this. We're gonna have more of these, but to not be too guru-ish, the other thing I did was, okay, what are songs that are getting played in these TV commercials? What are songs that are getting played on these shows? What kind of music is playing these video games? What can I do to curate my songwriting so that it fits that, but to not sacrifice anything on who I am and the sound that we, have worked on, so that I didn't go back to who I was before we didn't get the record deal with Shelby, but that I'm paying attention and being wise about, what we can do. And sometimes we had things. I was working with a guy named Jerry Pilato at Indie Orange, who was helped us with the licensing for Sleeping with Lions, and he told me he was like he listened to the record before he came out, a couple different records, and said, these are great, man. If you took this song and just changed the lyrics where it wasn't so much first person, or if you weren't so specific about this in this song, we probably could get you a sync deal on it. But those particular songs were very personal to me, and I didn't. It didn't feel good for me to do that, so I didn't do that. So it's a fine line of, you know, making sure that you're true to yourself, but understanding that there's a market, and there's opportunities to be able to make financial gain and some stability for your band and for your art if you get those.
But like Sleeping with Lions, I mean, it got on numerous shows.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And
then
and
how does that? Sorry, how does that compare with getting it onto a video game? Like, is there one better over the other?
yeah, um well, the particular video game that we got on was much bigger. Um because it was such a big video game with Keanu Reeves and it was such an anticipated thing. Um, the TV stuff and the commercial stuff gives you an opportunity to continue creating a story and to say, hey, come see our band because we have a song in the Dodge commercial, we have a song in this, whatever. You might have heard us because of this or that. And those were financially all very lucrative, especially compared to streaming and album sales.
Mhm.
The video game was a different level. They So at the point that we got the video game, I was working with Peer Publishing, who is currently our publisher as well. And they messaged me and they said, "Hey, we have a company that produces video games." And I had already really tried number of times to submit our music for video games and hadn't got anything. But they said, "We have a company that is producing a video game that needs two songs that's unreleased that you haven't put out before. And they really like your band. Do you want to do that?" And I said, "Well, how much would it pay?" And he told me, and the number was, it wasn't much. It was enough to go, sure, but it wasn't anything that made me think, oh, this is a really big video game. I thought, okay, whatever. And it's always a long shot. You put in for hundreds of those and you don't
Right.
ever hear anything back. But um, I said, well, let me see what I have. So we had Mojo Hand and we had Suffer Me, and those were songs that didn't make the record. I liked the songs, but I just didn't think they were good enough to be on the record, so we held them out. So I submitted those two things. I didn't hear anything about that for 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was actually laying in bed, and it's 10:30 at night, and my publisher emailed and said, "I need to call you." And they called me and they said, "Hey, you remember those songs you put in for the video game?" I'm like, "No." I couldn't, I didn't even remember it at all. And once they explained it, I'm like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I remember that." And they said, "Well, the company wants to use your songs for the video game. And actually, this is what the money is." And the money was good, it was much better. And I said, "Well, what is the name of the video game?" Because originally they wouldn't tell me. And at this point, they said, "We can't tell you until you confirm that you're in it." And I said, "Well, I'm fine with doing it. I want to make sure that it's not a video game that's like, pornography or something violent or racist, or, I want to make sure it's not something I'm not going to line up with." So anyway, they said, "Well, we'll call you back in a couple days." And so they called me back, and then they told me, they said, "Well, it's cyberpunk." I didn't have any idea what that was, and they said, "Well, it's Keanu Reeves," and I love Keanu, so I was like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm all about it." But at this point, they said, "But we have a problem. We have good news and bad news." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "The good news is they want both songs for the video game, but they also want Mojo Hand for the trailer for the whole video game, for the big trailer." And I said, "Okay, well, that's great. That's going to be more money in it." And they said, "Yeah, it's X amount of money." X amount of money was enough for, I almost dropped my phone. It was very good money to a guy that has been struggling and to be able to, to keep the
So you're
band on
saying
the
it
road.
was more than $300?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was really good money, but they said, "Here's the problem. They've hired a musicologist, and they think that you took the song from a band called, gee, many Christmas. I can't believe I'm forgetting this. They said you took it from another band, from another artist, and I can't remember the name of this band, and it's going to drive me nuts." Anyway, I said, "Well, I didn't do that. I don't know. I don't even listen to that band. Like, I don't know what that is." And they said, "Well, they want you. They'll pay you the amount of money for it, but they want you to sign something that says you co-wrote the song with this other band." So I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." And they said, "Well, this is the money." And they get 10% of the money, so they wanted me to do it. And I said, "You know what? I just it just feels gross to me because I've, like, if you had said, 'Hey, it kind of sounds like the Black Crowes or like the Stones or like Sabbath or like John Lee Hooker or B.B. King was something that I listened to and that I was a fan of, I would have said, okay, well, that's probably right. I can get, but this is a band I didn't listen to, I didn't like, not, and I just said no because I would have had to split the money with the guy and give him, and I'm like, I worked too hard for this. I'm not giving some guy half the money for this. I don't care how much it is. And so they said, okay, we're going to go back and we're going to tell them that. We'll let you know what they say. So 2 days later, they called me back again and they said, listen, they really like your song and they really want it to be the trailer for this. So they have agreed to pay you the full amount, but they're also going to pay the other guy the full amount too. And you've got to say that you wrote the song with it. So now, instead of me splitting the money in half, they've agreed to pay me the full amount that they originally offered. But I have to stomach that this guy's going to get this money for nothing. He didn't write the song. He didn't have anything to do with it. And
Right.
but it was I had you know God tapping me on the shoulder, going, don't be humble here. Don't be stupid. And it was money that helped me in a time I'd gotten remarried. We were trying to pay for things. I'm trying to keep the band floating in. So we did the deal. So that particular video game was very financially fruitful, and it's the biggest deal that we have gotten over the commercials and the other stuff, which have all been great too. But that video game is a lot. They invested a lot of money in advertising.
I mean, that
Uh,
trailer has over 15 million views.
yeah, I think the combined views of the different cuts of that trailer, because Sony put one out as well, I think it's close to 300 million. So I mean and you asked me earlier, how much does it help when we have a song in a Chevy truck commercial? It helps in the fact that a lot of people will come up to you and go, "Hey, dude, I heard this band and it sounded just like you, and it was a Chevy truck commercial." And I'm like, "Well, that was us." Um, but the video game, we would be playing a small town in Sweden or Germany or wherever, and there would be three people in the audience that go, "I found you on Cyberpunk, man. You're my favorite band." So
Wow.
that it really and it changed our demographic some because uh, especially with us being blues oriented, that tends to be guys that are 35, folks that are 35 to 75, that are more blues or blues rock focused. And that opened up really 18 to 25 for us as a listening group and as a fan group after the video game.
So I don't want the details, but when you sign a contract like that, is it just for the rights that they, no matter how many games they sell, that doesn't make a difference? They give you a flat rate for the use of that song.
That's right. That's right. But I get a certain amount of money for the streams of like the trailer, and I use a small percentage on that. Something that helps long term. As the songwriter of the song, you get a little bit of that kind of floats forever. Same way with like Animal Kingdom. Like we had the song in that one episode, but it could get relicensed for a DVD box set in Australia or Japan or somewhere, and then you get a little bit of money trickle in from that. So the goal is business wise, uh, to have enough of those that you have some multiple streams of income that are coming in, albeit how small that they are, that add up to help keep you on the road. And since we're doing streaming now instead of selling CDs and vinyl as much,
Right.
it all helps.
Okay, so if we go back a little bit, you decide you're gonna start a two-piece band because you don't really want to commit to a band. The two-piece band starts happening, things happen, and all of a sudden you're releasing albums, and they're getting some play, they're getting decent sales, you're getting licensing sync deals. At what point do you know your sound? At what point do you know the Cold Stare sound or who you are as a musician?
Right away, first record. Yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah, it evolves. but the framework of I don't before that there were a lot of times, again, because I was blessed, there were times before that I went, I could probably do country. Like I could write, I write country songs. There are times that I could say, I want to do something a little bit more heavier, or I want to be strictly just blues. Because I could take a percentage of my persona and who I am and allocate it 100% towards that and do something that's pretty good. But after that point, I there wasn't that after the first record came out and after getting through being sick, there wasn't that many times that I thought I like this, but or there probably were more times that there weren't that many hurdles that I said I'm going to try to do this, but it's not really who I am. I just didn't do that anymore.
Right.
Um, to the point of I'm not going to be a traditional blues thing, even though I love that. Like, I love that. But even, just having some clarity and probably some age looking at the field of artists out there, there's already those guys that are doing Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff. And there already are those guys, that can do BB King things. And there are those guys that can do this. But really, I always think about a band. Like, there's numerous great blues artists that don't sound like other people. I think the misnomer is a lot of kids, like my son's 18, and he'll say, "Ah, so much of the blues sounds the same. So much of the blues that you're listening to sounds the same."
Right.
But Robert Johnson doesn't sound anything like Muddy Waters, even though that there is a tie between them. Um, and so I could look out and see what ground was being covered, and in the ground that we cover, which is lyrically a big influence from Delta blues and early blues, but sonically more blues rock of the 70s. There wasn't that many bands that were covering that. So it also, and that's who I am. That's who I was. So it's doesn't make sense to deviate too far out of that. And so I really felt like I understood who we were from the first record and didn't want to screw around with that much. The thing that shifted when we added the bass player and added Bryce was I had played so much guitar that I was enjoying playing guitar, but when we would play live, the solos that I would play on the record, I couldn't play them live. So we'd had to change the songs a little bit live. And at that point, we were with Mascot Records, and they saw us in Europe, and they go, "Listen, this is fantastic, but miss the solo, that you played on the album, or miss this part because you couldn't play it." And I was secure enough in what our sound was and what I was writing at that point that I thought I can add a bass player now, and it's not going to change drastically who I am or who this is or what we're going for. Early on, if I'd have added a bass player, we would have taken off in a direction too quickly outside of what we normally would do because as soon as you have that other member, you can go, "Oh, well, we couldn't do this before, but now we can." You know?
But can you explain that concept of being a two-piece band, you playing the guitar and basically filling in the bass role, and maybe even
Sure,
more, because you had two or three amps that did different things,
sure.
but not too
Yeah,
technically.
yeah. The easiest way to describe it is the song "Highway to Hell" by AC/DC, and
Mm.
that's the way I would approach it to an engineer, sound engineer, when we would go into a club and they would say, "Oh, I listened to you guys' record, but you're just two pieces," and I would say, "Yes, we're Highway to Hell." Because when you hear the verse is going to be one guitar amp, my vocal, and the drums. When the bridge comes to the song, you'll hear a second guitar amp come in. And so now we have stereo guitar amps. So it sounds like there's one person on each side of the stage, even though that there's just two people. When the chorus comes in, then the bass part will be added as well. And so now you really have that 3D image. And the thing that you have to be very careful with as a two-piece band is to not give it all up front. because if you like, we never played with tracks. We always kept it just my amps. It was just a lot for me to pack around because I had to bring two guitar amps and a bass amp. But by doing that, um, when you first started out, from an audience perspective, they go, "Oh yeah, it sounds great. The guitar sounds great. The vocals, drums." And then the second guitar comes in, and they're like, "Oh wow, it's really big. And now it sounds like there's only one guy playing, but it sounds like two." And then the bass came in, and it was very easy for us to knock crowds out and to wow crowds, even crowds that didn't necessarily would have listened to the record and gone, "Oh, I just love this band." If they saw us live, they would at least appreciate that we could, as two people without computers, still sound like three or four guys. Um, and to not be too specific, but the way that I did that was I had a pedal designed by a guy in Indiana, from a guitar company called Delisle, and he created a pedal that I could put one guitar path in, and then would have three outputs, and I could control the gain on it. And out of that, the first amplifier would be a regular amplifier, just like Angus would use if it's AC/DC that we're talking about. The second one that went out was, I had an octave pedal that was in there. So it sounded like a second guitar amp, but it had a one octave down, deeper sound as well to it that thickened it up. Then the third output would go out, and it would go into a pedal that had two octaves down. Out of that into a bass simulator, and then into a bass amp. So I would tell the sound guys, by the time my signal hits the bass cabinet, it's a truly going to sound like a bass sound. So we were really able to make it sound full. The problem is that when you're on that chorus and you have those three, you can't chord
Right.
because it sounds muddy. So it has to be singular. But what that did was make me go, okay, the cold stairs formula is I can play in the verses, I can play chords. But when I get to the chorus, it has to be singular line, which sounds a lot like Black Sabbath or Rage Against the Machine. If you isolate the riffs, it could be Hound Dog Taylor. It's very simple. But that simplicity made me focus on the lyrics and the melody, and it kept things in a formula box that helped us write the first couple records. Hopefully that makes
It
sense.
does. So when you make that decision to get a bass player, you've been working with just the drummer for many, many years. You're traveling, you're
Yeah.
comfortable with your travel mate. What considerations are made in order to make that decision to bring in a bass player and what you're looking for?
We had tried at a couple times previously we were in the studio and I would play the bass parts. After the first couple albums, I started playing the bass parts in the studio differently than the guitars every now and then, just because I wanted some variation. And when I would do that, then when we got to live, I would have to change it some because, it wasn't the exact thing. So I started thinking, well, if we had a bass player. So we auditioned a couple bass players, and all the guys that came in were great. A couple of the guys, uh, very well known from other bands. It just didn't feel right. It just didn't fit at the time. Um, and nothing against those guys at all. It just wasn't the right time for us. After we had gotten back from we'd done a couple European tours, and we had a meeting with Mascot, and they said, yeah, we think you should add a bass player for you to be able to play. Like, we really like we're enjoying your guitar playing, play your solos live. We have a friend of ours that him and his brother had been coming out and seeing us for years. And I knew that was one big thing of, I didn't want somebody in the band because they go, well, you guys tour around the world and you've had this success and whatever else. So why wouldn't I want to play bass? I wanted somebody that liked our music, even if we weren't successful from the start. And Bryce and his brother Tyler had came out and seen us from the very beginning. They were big fans of the band early on. So I knew it wasn't something that was put on because somebody was wanting to, take advantage of the band, take advantage of the situation. And then the other thing was is Bryce. We just knew he was a great bass player, but he was already a friend. And to travel, it is as important to be able, and not only just to be able to, but to enjoy being around somebody that much as it is for them to be proficient on their instrument. It's almost better sometimes to have somebody that you really like and you want to have dinner with, or that you've got to lose luggage with, or miss a flight with, or be in a stressful situation with, as it is to be in a band with somebody that can play the parts. With Bryce, we got lucky, and he's a great musician, a great bass player, but he's also a good friend of the band, and he fit in right away. Now, I was convinced when we came back from Europe after the conversation with Mascot, I was convinced I wanted a bass player. Brian was not. Our drummer was not, and he was adamant that it would change my formula of writing. It would change the success, and we would go from being a two-piece band that can go out and shock people that we sound so big to being a three-piece band that everybody's going to, say, well, there's so many other three-piece bands. My logic at the time was by the time we were at that point, the Black Keys, the White Stripes, we had played some festivals with a band called the Blue Stones, and some of these other bands were using tracks and stuff. And for the average listener listening, if they hear the Blue Stones and they're playing tracks, not that I love those guys, not to take anything away from there. They just do it differently than us. But from a band that's listened to us, or Royal Blood was another band. Um, those bands, the artists, the audience doesn't know that we are committed to not using tracks, and the other band is using tracks. They just think it song sounds good or it doesn't,
Right.
you know. And I knew at this point, first of all, I'd played so much guitar over the last decade before Bryce got in that I'm really enjoying playing guitar, and my blues playing and where I was wanting to be as a guitar player is really, I'm enjoying myself. And I want to be able to grow that and to do that live. And I knew we had to have a bass player to do that. And I was adamant about it. And I knew it wouldn't change I knew it would change things for the better because I wasn't going to allow the formula to get too far out of whack. But we had a meeting. I asked Bryce to come and meet us for lunch, and we met, and I told him we were thinking about it. We hadn't even played with him, and I said, if you don't mind, here's a list of songs. If you can kind of get these together, come just jam with us. And when we left, Brian was still not, still didn't want to have a bass player. But I called Bryce afterwards, and I said, "You're in," because I like you, and I want you to be in the band. And I knew he was play great. So he shows up at the first rehearsal, and not only had he learned the 4 or 5 songs that I had told him, he learned the entire catalog. He learned 5 or 6 albums worth of material and could play it all. And you're nervous when you come in there the first time, but I knew it would fit. And it's still, I feel like now we've been playing together he's been in the band 3 years. We're just now really clicking live the way that Brian and I click, because Brian and I played together 20 years. It takes a while, but Bryce has really fit in and made us a better band. But man, I can't really, I don't know if it wasn't Bryce. I don't know who would have fit better. I don't. That was tough. You know.
So you have a new album coming out called Texas, and I believe it's coming out in May. Is that correct?
Yeah, May 1st.
But you've released some tracks already.
Yes.
One of the tracks is Changing Things, which is a great B.B. King tune. And as great as B.B. King is, he wasn't really known for writing songs. I mean, he did write some, but that's not what
Yeah.
he's known for. He did a lot of covers. But that's a great song. How did you decide to pick that song?
We were doing our second Joe Bonamassa cruise, so keeping the blues alive cruise.
Who's
We did
also a
the one in
huge
the
fan of yours.
Yes, yes. He's such a good friend and such a sweet guy, and not only for with us, but with so many artists. He's so helpful. But we had done the Mediterranean cruise, and then we had the Alaskan cruise earlier this year, and Jimmy Vivino was band leader. and they were doing it's BB King's 100th birthday this year, and they were doing a tribute night, and they asked us to play a song and asked us to pick one. And as you said, BB's I feel like what BB's known for is a little bit more of a happy blues. There's not so many in his in his catalog that's more uh, heavy blues. You got the couple big hits in there. But anyway, I just kind of went through the catalog and looking for one that kind of fit us, and I feel like we're a little bit more heavy, not only just with the sound, but sometimes with the topics for whatever reason. And that song just struck me, and so we worked it up and we played it on the cruise. And when we got back, I had heard a couple other versions of the songs that other acts had done, and I just thought, man, we do a pretty good version of this. Like it was really natural for us to play that one and felt really good. And as we discussed earlier, it felt like it came from an honest place with me. And so I said, let's just cut it. And we did. And then we already had Texas done. And I said, we should just put it on the record because a lot of people had heard a little bit of the song and clips or whatever else. They're like, yeah, man, that would be great on vinyl. So I'm like, you know, let's throw it on the record. So we added it on there to fill out the album.
The idea behind the album is, I guess, you're people who have inspired you, Texas musician or Texas music that has inspired you, and then your take on, I guess, that sound. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah, not only that, but just in our touring over the years, there are just some places that we tour to that just the whole area is just kind of consumed with music. And Texas is one of those places. Austin, especially, is just one of those places where you just can't escape it. And there's so many uh, great artists there. So the first time that we toured through Texas and we played Austin, I thought then, this would be a great creative spot to write and record a record because it's just music everywhere you go. Nashville used to be like that, and it's so commercialized and so, you know, kind of Vegasy that I don't feel it. Memphis is still a place like that to us, but we did the Ways record in Memphis, and we did the Southern record in Memphis. Those records are really draw from that Memphis vibe. But I specifically wanted to write and record something that we would do record in Texas and have those elements in mind of the Texas blues guys that we liked and rock guys that we liked.
In the beginning, you said you wanted to learn as much about the business, managing studio, whatever, so you can get a good handle on things. I know that Intrepid is now your booking agent. Are you still heavily involved in the business side, or have you hired management and other help?
Yeah, no, we've had Intrepid for a few years now, and the amount of help that they've given us is just beyond explanation. It was so much work booking all the stuff myself. Even when and we had a couple other people that were helping us, but there's so much to booking and being a band that's out on tour is playing in the right rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you're a heavy metal band and they put you in a room where there's a lot of country artists, it doesn't work. And if you're a blues rock band like us and they put you in places where it's either heavy metal or if it's rap or whatever. So Intrepid really had their finger on the pulse of blues rock and blues artists and what places to play and whatnot to. So few years ago, we turned everything over them, and they have been fantastic. As far as the rest of the business stuff, I'll probably always have at least or more interest and say so than other artists. I would advise anybody to allocate as much time as you can to understanding what's going on and to be fundamental in the decisions that you're going to make, with your band or with your career. So this record and the last record, the Southern Part Two, are both on our label. The Southern Part One was Mascot. We had a three-record deal with them, and one thing that I realized was, when you sign a record deal and the record company holds some of your publishing, then they can have say so when you do sync. If we do another Ford commercial, they're
Yeah.
also going to get some of that money. And then, you know, it's like having a mortgage on a home. You're not the only person with your name on that. They have too, and they always will. And I had some streaming rights to some songs that were mine uh, alone from Mountain that I sold, and I saw how lucrative that could be, and I just decided I don't, unless there's a, once you kind of understand what a record company does is they have multiple pieces that they create a team that does a thing for you. Once you understand that, then you can go out and hire those team components. You can um, negotiate the prices with them. So a record company might say, okay, you need a publicist for the record. The publicist is going to cost you $3,000 a month. Well, if you make $3,000 in that month, the record company takes half of it. So that's $1,500 to them. So now you got 1,500, but you owe another 1,500 for the press agent. It's really not a great situation to be in. The better situation to be in is to understand what they're doing, and then you contact the same press agent and say, okay, I'd like to offer you $2,200 a month to do the same thing. You're keeping all the money if you can afford to do that and assemble that team. So that's what we've done. We have paid attention to what the other labels have done, and sometimes a record label, let's say that the album budget was $50,000, so you don't really make any money until that $50,000 is paid back. But what happens is when you get to the point where there's $3,000 left to go before you start earning money, the record company will, they have the right to, and they will say, hey, we have an opportunity for some advertising. We need to spend $10,000. But really, by them spending $10,000, what they really spent was $20,000 because half of that money is already, doubling up on the money that you're going to, and they keep you in the black forever. You never get out of that hole. So we are in the black with every record. So with our small stone record label deal, we continue to make money on that record, and we don't owe anything. The record deal that followed that was with Anti-Fragile. What we did with them was we leased them the record for 2 years. So the record and the publishing rights reverted back to me. So we're in the black and we're making money on those. And the deal with Mascot, those three records, we're not in the black yet, but we will be. Um, but these last two records are our team, and I can't foresee us going back. It's especially now the way the world is and the way albums are. If you can fund your own record and you can see what you need to make the engine run and you can afford to pay that yourself, it's way more, you have way more advantage by, doing that.
Chris, my last question to you. Do you have goals at this point musically?
Yeah, I think I'm pedaling the bicycle downhill a little bit, and I just want to keep going. It's like with us, the resistance is less for us. It's easier for us to get shows. It's easier for us to put out a record and it getting heard. So our goal is now that we've seen a little sunlight, to just keep pushing for that and keep working for that. I would like my goal is to not be outworked. So I look at artists like James Brown in the 70s and a lot of these artists in the 60s that would put out multiple records a year. And so with us, we're only held back by how much I want to work and how many songs I want to write. So I'd like to put out 2 albums a year for the Cold Stairs, and I'd like to put out 1 album a year that's a Chris Tapp record that's more blues focused, and to try to stay on that path. And I'd like to build up a catalog that, I believe that if we were in the 70s and we would have had a song came out like Any Way the Wind Blows, we would have had a possibility to have a hit song, maybe not a hit song, but a classic rock song in the way that Robin Trower or some of the bands that we like had. I don't have that opportunity now because Radio is not there uh, because the schematics have changed on how you can look at the machine. But what I would like at the end of my career is for somebody to look at the catalog and go, they were proficient. They had a lot of great records. Even if they didn't have the big hits, they continually put out solid, great releases. They didn't phone it in. So it's just how much better can I get as a songwriter? How much better can we get on recording? How much can we tighten the ship? And what kind of legacy can I leave? If I don't have the hit songs, can I have a catalog that goes, man, looking at this, it's a lot of great work.
Well, from what I've heard, I've listened to a lot of your music over the last few days, and it's quite an impressive catalog. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
reaching out, and thank you so much for sharing your story, because I find it such a fascinating story, and good for you for doing what you do.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having so many artists on there that people get to hear their stories and maybe get inspired by. So I appreciate you having me.
Well, thanks a lot.